Comparing and evaluating theories. 1.7. Identify the stand taken by each major theory on the three basic issues of human development. In the preceding sections, we reviewed major theoretical perspectives in human development research. They differ in many respects. First, they focus on different domains of development. Some, such as the psychoanalytic perspective and ethology, emphasize emotional and social development. Others, such as Piaget's cognitive developmental theory, information processing, and Vygotsky's sociocultural theory, stress changes in thinking. The remaining approaches, behaviorism, social learning theory, evolutionary developmental psychology, ecological systems theory, and the lifespan perspective, encompass many aspects of human functioning. Second, every theory contains a point of view about development. As we conclude our review of theoretical perspectives, identify the stand that each theory takes on the basic issues discussed in the beginning of this chapter. Then check your analysis against Table 1.4. Finally, we have seen that every theory has strengths and limitations. Perhaps you are attracted to some theories, but have doubts about others. As you read more about development in later chapters, you may find it useful to keep a notebook in which you test your own theoretical likes and dislikes against the evidence. Don't be surprised if you revise your ideas many times, just as theorists have done since scientific study of development began. Studying development. 1.8. Describe methods commonly used in research on human development. 1.9. Distinguish between correlational and experimental research designs, noting the strengths and limitations of each. 1.10. Describe the science for studying development, noting the strengths and limitations of each. In every science, research is usually based on hypothesis, a prediction drawn directly from a theory. Theories and hypotheses, however, merely initiate the many activities that result in sound evidence on human development. Conducting research according to scientifically accepted procedures involves many steps and choices. Investigators must decide which participants and how many to include. Then they must figure out what the participant will be asked to do, and when, where, and how many times each will be seen. Finally, they must examine and draw conclusions from their data. In the following sections, we look at research strategies commonly used to study human development. We begin with research methods. The specific activities of participants, such as taking tests, answering questionnaires, responding to interviews, or being observed. Then we turn to research designs, overall plans for research studies that permit the best possible test of the investigator's hypothesis. Finally, we discuss ethical issues involved in doing research with human participants. Why learn about research strategies? There are two reasons. First, each of us must be a wise and critical consumer of knowledge. Knowing the strengths and limitations of various research strategies is important in separating dependable information from misleading results. Second, individuals who work directly with children or adults may be in a unique position to build bridges between research and practice by conducting studies, either on their own or in partnership with experienced investigators. Community agencies such as schools, mental health facilities, and parks and recreation programs sometimes collaborate with researchers in designing, implementing, and evaluating interventions aimed at enhancing development. To broaden these efforts, a basic understanding of the research process is essential. Look and listen. Ask a teacher, counselor, social worker, or nurse to describe a question about development he or she would like researchers to address. After reading the rest of this chapter, recommend research strategies best suited to answering that question. Common research methods. How does a researcher choose a basic approach to gathering information? Common methods include systematic observation, self-reports such as questionnaires and interviews, clinical or case studies of a single individual, and ethnographies of the life circumstances of a specific group of people. Table 1.5 summarizes the strengths and limitations of each of these methods. Systematic observation. Observations of the behavior of children and adults can be made in different ways. One approach is to go into the field or natural environment and record the behavior of interest, a method called naturalistic observation. A study of preschoolers' responses to their peers' distress provides a good example. Observing 3- and 4-year-olds in childcare centers, the researchers recorded each instance of crying and the reactions of nearby children, whether they ignored, watched, commented on the child's unhappiness, scolded or teased, or shared, helped, or expressed sympathy. Caregiver behaviors explaining why a child was crying, mediating conflict, or offering comfort were noted to see if adult sensitivity was related to children's caring responses. A strong relationship emerged. A great strength of naturalistic observation is that investigators can see directly the everyday behaviors they hope to explain. Naturalistic observation also has a major limitation. Not all individuals have the same opportunity to display a particular behavior in everyday life. In the study just described, some children might have witnessed a child crying more often than others or been exposed to more cues for positive social responses from caregivers. For these reasons, they might have displayed more compassion. Researchers commonly deal with this difficulty by making structured observations in which the investigator sets up a laboratory situation that evokes the behavior of interest so that every participant has equal opportunity to display the response. In one such study, 2-year-olds' emotional reactions to harm that they thought they had caused were observed by asking each of them to take care of a rag doll that had been modified so its leg would fall off when the child picked it up. To make the child feel at fault, once the leg detached, an adult talked for the doll, saying, "Ow!" Researchers recorded children's facial expressions of sadness and concern for the injured doll, efforts to help the doll and body tension, responses that indicated worry, remorse, and a desire to make amends. In addition, mothers were asked to engage in brief conversations about emotions with their children. Toddlers whose mothers more often explained their causes and consequences of emotion were more likely to express concern for the injured doll. The procedures used to collect systematic observations vary, depending on the research problem posed. Sometimes investigators choose to describe the entire stream of behavior, everything said and done over a certain time period. In one study, researchers wanted to find out whether maternal sensitivity in infancy and early childhood contributes to readiness for formal schooling at age 6. Between ages 6 months and 4.5 years, the investigators periodically videotaped mother-child play sessions. They then rated each session for many behaviors: maternal positive emotion, support, stimulating play, and respect for the child's autonomy. These ingredients of sensitivity did predict better language and academic progress when the children reached kindergarten. Researchers have devised ingenious ways of observing difficult-to-capture behaviors. For example, to record instances of bullying, a group of investigators set up video cameras overlooking a classroom and a playground and had 4th to 6th graders wear small remote microphones and pocket-sized transmitters. Results revealed that bullying occurred often, at rates of 2.4 episodes per hour in the classroom and 4.5 episodes per hour on the playground. Yet only 15 to 18% of the time did teachers take steps to stop the harassment. Systematic observation provides invaluable information on how children and adults actually behave, but it tells us little about the reasoning behind the responses. For this kind of information, researchers must turn to self-report techniques. Self-reports. Self-reports ask research participants to provide information on their perceptions, thoughts, abilities, feelings, attitudes, beliefs, and past experiences. They range from relatively unstructured interviews to highly structured interviews, questionnaires, and tests. In a clinical interview, researchers use a flexible, conversational style to probe for the participant's point of view. In the following example, Piaget questioned a 5-year-old child about his understanding of dreams. Where does the dream come from? I think you sleep so well that you dream. Does it come from us or from outside? From outside. When you are in bed and you dream, where is the dream? In my bed, under the blanket. I don't really know. If it was in my stomach, the bones would be in the way and I shouldn't see it. Is the dream there when you sleep? Yes, it is in the bed beside me. Although a researcher conducting clinical interviews with more than one participant would typically ask the same first questions to establish a common task, individualized prompts are used to provide a fuller picture of each person's reasoning. The clinical interview has 2 major strengths. First, it permits people to display their thoughts in terms that are as close as possible to the way they think in everyday life. Second, the clinical interview can provide a large amount of information in a fairly brief period. For example, in an hour-long session, we can obtain a wide range of information on child rearing from a parent or on life circumstances from an older adult, much more than we could capture by observing for the same amount of time. A major limitation of the clinical interview has to do with the accuracy with which people report their thoughts, feelings, and experiences. Some participants, wishing to please the interviewer, may make up answers that do not represent their actual thinking. When asked about past events, some may have trouble recalling exactly what happened, and because the clinical interview depends on verbal ability and expressiveness, it may underestimate the capacities of individuals who have difficulty putting their thoughts into words. The clinical interview has also been criticized because of its flexibility. When questions are phrased differently for each participant, responses may reflect the manner of interviewing rather than real differences in the way people think about a topic. Structured interviews, including tests and questionnaires in which each participant is asked the same set of questions in the same way, eliminate this problem. These instruments are also much more efficient. Answers are briefer, and researchers can obtain written responses from an entire group at the same time. Furthermore, by listing answer alternatives, researchers can specify the activities and behaviors of interest, ones that participants might not think of in an open-ended clinical interview. For example, when a sample of parents was asked what they considered the most important thing for children to prepare them for life, 62% checked to think for themselves when this choice appeared on the list. Yet, only 5% thought of this during a clinical interview. Nevertheless, structured interviews do not yield the same depth of information as a clinical interview, and they can still be affected by the problem of inaccurate reporting. The clinical or case study method. An outgrowth of psychoanalytic theory, the clinical or case study method brings together a wide range of information on one person, including interviews, observations, and test scores. The aim is to obtain as complete a picture as possible of that individual's psychological functioning and the experiences that led up to it. The clinical method is well suited to studying the development of certain types of individuals who are few in number but vary widely in characteristics. For example, the method has been used to find out what contributes to the accomplishments of prodigies, extremely gifted children who attain adult competence in a field before age 10. In one investigation, researchers conducted case studies of 8 child prodigies nationally recognized for talents in such areas as art, music, and mathematics. One child began playing the violin at 28 months, had won regional competitions as a 5-year-old, and by age 7 had performed as a soloist at New York's Carnegie Hall and Lincoln Center. Another child started reading as an infant, took college-level classes beginning at age 8, and published a paper in Mathematics Journal at 13. Across the 8 cases, the investigators noticed interesting patterns, including above-average intelligence and exceptionally high scores on tests of memory and attention to detail. Notably, several prodigies had relatives with autism, a condition that also involves intense attention to detail. The researchers concluded that although child prodigies generally do not display the cognitive and social deficits of autism, the two groups may share an underlying genetic trait that affects the functioning of certain brain regions, heightening perception and attention. The clinical method yields richly detailed case narratives that offer valuable insights into the many factors influencing development. Nevertheless, like all other methods, it has drawbacks. Because information often is collected unsystemically and subjectively, researchers' theoretical preferences may bias their observations and interpretations. In addition, investigators cannot assume that their conclusions apply or generalize to anyone other than the person studied. Even when patterns emerge across cases, it is wise to confirm these with other research strategies. Methods for studying culture. To study the impact of culture, researchers adjust the methods just considered or tap procedures specially devised for cross-cultural and multicultural research. Which approach investigators choose depends on the research goals. Sometimes researchers are interested in characteristics that are believed to be universal, but that vary in degree from one society to the next. Are parents warmer or more directive in some cultures than others? How strong are gender stereotypes in different nations? In each instance, several cultural groups will be compared, and all participants must be questioned or observed in the same way. Therefore, researchers draw on the observational and self-report procedures we have already considered, adapting them through translation so they can be understood in each cultural context. For example, To study cultural variation in parenting practices, the same questionnaire asking for ratings on such items as "I often start a conversation with my parents about what happens in school" or "My parents can tell when I'm upset about something" is given to all participants. Still, investigators must be mindful of cultural differences in familiarity with being observed and with responding to self-report instruments, which may bias their findings. At other times, researchers want to uncover the cultural meanings of children's and adults' behaviors by becoming as familiar as possible with their way of life. To achieve this goal, investigators rely on a method borrowed from the field of anthropology, ethnography. Like the clinical method, ethnographic research is a descriptive, qualitative technique, but instead of aiming to understand a single individual, it is directed toward understanding a culture or a distinct social group through participant observation. Typically, the researcher spends months and sometimes years in the cultural community participating in its daily life. Extensive field notes are gathered, consisting of a mix of observations, self-reports from members of the culture, and careful interpretations of the investigator. Later, these notes are put together into a description of the community that tries to capture its unique values and social processes. The ethnographic method assumes that entering into close contact with a social group will allow researchers to understand the beliefs and behaviors of its members in a way that is not possible with an observational visit, interview, or questionnaire. Some ethnographies take in many aspects of experience, as one researcher did in describing what it's like to grow up in a small American town. Others focus on one or a few settings and issues, for example, youth resilience in an economically disadvantaged Alaskan Native community or African Caribbean adults' reactions to a diagnosis of high blood pressure, signaling elevated risk for heart disease. Notice how such ethnographic evidence is vital for designing effective interventions. Researchers may supplement traditional self-report and observational methods with ethnography if they suspect that unique meanings underlie cultural differences, as the cultural influences box on page 32 reveals. Ethnographers strive to minimize their influence on the culture they are studying by becoming part of it. Nevertheless, as with clinical research, investigators' cultural values and theoretical commitments sometimes lead them to observe selectively or misinterpret what they see. Finally, the findings of ethnographic studies cannot be assumed to generalize beyond the people and settings in which the research was conducted. Ask yourself. Connect. What strengths and limitations do the clinical or case study, method, and ethnography have in common? Apply. A researcher wants to study the thoughts and feelings of parents on active duty in the military and those of school-age and adolescent children. Which method should he use? Why? Reflect. Reread the description of non-normative influences on page 10 and cite an example from your own life. Which method would be best suited to studying the impact of such a normative event on development?